Hello, this is Jesse Thurl, a DECA advisor, and I appreciate your time and willingness to volunteer to be a practice judge at our upcoming competitions. In preparation for our judging competitions, I put together a quick overview that will walk you through logistics, what to expect, what's your role, and also how to give feedback to students in a way that's going to help them get better. So to start, we'll look at logistics. As a judge, you'll be judging a specific section. For example, Section A, Section B. And during these sections, you'll probably see 5 to 8 presentations, with each presentation being a max of 7 minutes. During the presentation, students have 5 minutes to share their ideas with you, and you have 2 minutes to ask questions based off of what they said. We'll want to make sure that we stick to this max of 7 minutes to be efficient with our time and get everybody through, given the schedule that I build. Also during this time, you'll be provided with score sheets that have the student names on them with the time that you should see them. This will help you keep the order and make sure that the right team gets the score sheet that's in front of you. What to expect as you see students. Depending on the students, some will be more nervous than others based on their previous experience in DECA. Also, I want you to keep in mind that these students are not experienced professionals. I think as time goes on and we gain experience in our fields, we tend to have a bigger tool belt to handle any situation and any problem given. Understanding that these students are 18 years old or even down to 15 years old is something that I think we need to be reminded of. However, you will see a variety of abilities. Some students you'd want to give a job to on the spot. Some students you'll see need quite a bit of coaching. Again, you'll see it all. What I ask that you do is look for areas to help these students grow. So what's your role in all of this? You'll be given a case study that asks you to assume a role such as manager, boss, director, something that will be indicated within the study itself. I will attach this in an email along with this recording. What I ask is that you please take a look at it prior to the night of the practice. Your role will be to listen to students' presentations and ask questions at the end of their presentations. Again, this goes back to our previous slide, which was 5 minutes for the students to give presentations and up to 2 minutes for you to ask questions as needed. Sometimes students will actually ask you questions before they are done, so if they do prompt you with a question, feel free to answer that question based on what they ask. At the end of the 7 minutes, or however long their presentation goes, again, some might be quicker, or some you might have to actually cut off, but at the end of it, I'll ask that you step out of your role and provide the student feedback on the spot. Thinking about feedback, I always like to use sports as an analogy. Think of the time to give feedback sort of like a 30-second timeout. Some students, you won't have a whole lot to say because they did a really good job. Other students, you might not know where to start. So let's focus on this. Think about it as a positive and a constructive feedback that you could give that helps that student get better. One good, one way to improve. And the things that you should focus on are both the presentation and their skills and also the technical side. In the presentation, what I want you to look for is there a clear beginning, middle, and end that they address the problem or challenge that they were presented? And was it easy to follow their thinking as they shared back their ideas? Both these things help in the overall scoring because you'll need to be able to follow what they're talking about. On the technical side, I ask that you look at the performance indicators that were given to the student and are also indicated on the score sheets. And did the student actually address these indicators? What we've seen is students sometimes do a great job of presentation, but they fail to actually address what they're being scored on. So we want to see a balance of both. Did they hit the performance indicators, and was their presentation style done in a way that you could clearly follow what they were getting at? Finally, based on your experience, is this a practical plan is it profitable, and how would you measure the success of this plan? And if they said those things and mentioned those things, that's what we're looking for. So balance these two out as you're looking and seeing different presentations. Given that DECA is a competitive club, we also want to keep in mind the scoring and ranking. Now I understand it's hard when you see the first presentation to actually give that person a score, as you have nothing to base it off. Therefore, what I ask that you do is ask yourself, was this presentation better or worse than the last one? And then as you see each presentation, place that presentation in the appropriate spot. For example, this one was better than the last two, but not quite as good as my first two. Therefore, this student would be ranked number 3. What I want you to do then at the very end is just go back and make the scores work as needed to show that appropriate ranking. Since you provided feedback to the students on the spot, it is not necessary to provide additional written feedback, but more give the student a score so that they can see specifically what performance indicators were lacking. As for the first practice that we're going to have, I will be attaching this specific case study. What I want you to pay attention to is the performance indicators. Again, these are the scoring marks for students. They should be touching on these different points in their presentation. They don't have to be so direct to say, today I'm going to explain the nature of marketing management, because in the case study, they are taking on that role. What I want you to focus on in this specific one is, are they discussing the profit, risks involved in their decisions, as well as supply and demand? And in all of this, they're assuming the role of a marketing manager and doing some forecasting to help get at points 2 through 4. So please pay attention to the indicators and if students are addressing them. A particular event situation asks you as the judge to assume the company manager or the general manager role, as you can see by judge. So always look for this as far as what your role goes. The students are assuming the assistant manager role, and the overall scenario that they're trying to figure out is, with the 500 parking spaces provided, should they choose to lease these spaces or charge by the hour? The case study gives more details of what's already in place as well as what they're expected to figure out. It provides the numbers and thinking on this. Just in thinking about what the students come up with, what I want you to think about is the students will only have 15 minutes to read this, plan out an idea for solving it, and then have 5 minutes to present it to you. So a relatively short time to really plan out everything. However, from a judging standpoint, I will also provide this Excel spreadsheet to you so that you can kind of play around with the numbers if you have time in advance of the practice competition. How I built it was that you can assume these assumptions and just change these numbers to see how projections work out. Now understand, students won't be able to put something together like this in 15 minutes, but they may run a few numbers, and this is where the practical piece comes in to mind. So for example, if they are choosing to lease 100 spaces at an hourly rate, this will calculate and change all these numbers over here. Our basic assumptions for this were, how many spaces do we have available? What's the average hours parked per day at any space? The cost of $5 for each hour parked, and then the reality, which might be what percentage of that time do all spaces actually have a car or vehicle in them. So by adjusting any of these numbers up here will change. So just to run through a quick example, let's say that we have 100 spaces that average 5 hours parked in each space at $5. And let's just say that during those 5 hours, 50% of the spaces were always filled. By hitting enter after I made those changes, you can see both monthly projection as well as annual revenue brought in. If you are good with Excel, you can click on some of my cells to see the formulas and the assumptions that were made. However, if you just want to play with the numbers, please only change these cells based off of what the case study was asking. A couple other things that I do want you to also look for is students were given this sheet in advance of the practice. So please kind of take a look at the organization for how they are encouraged to set up their presentation. Again, do they have a clear opening? In this case, I said it's always helpful to state the problem or the challenge at hand. So they should have some kind of opening statement that addresses what they're there for. Another thing that's helpful is to tell you or the judge what you're going to tell them or have some agenda items. The agenda items then become the middle of the presentation or the plan. These should be addressed in a little bit more detail, but also not over the top that it makes it hard to follow. In closing the presentation, it's helpful for the student to do a summary of what they've told you, and then open the presentation up for questions. It's at this point that you have your 2 minutes to answer any or ask any questions that you may have. What I've normally seen in the past is after you've answered, or students have answered your question, there's an awkward quiet time. And what I've encouraged students to do, as in real life, you would never walk out of a meeting that you just set up without figuring out what you need to do next or come back to the table with in a future meeting, email, phone call, some follow-up to whatever the plan was going or the direction the plan was going. So what I've asked students to do is what I call the final close, is after answering your questions, to finally close up this presentation, I've encouraged them to ask for next steps, which could be a meeting, a phone call, an email, just to either look at something that needed to be developed from what they talked about, previewed, approved, or followed up on in a future discussion. At this point, they should, or in your role, you should say, great, let's follow up next week. And at that point, the role play situation ends and you guys can shake hands and move on to the next presentation. I hope this gives you a good overview of what to expect at our practices and also helps you provide solid feedback to the students in an effort to improve their chances of advancing through the real competitions that will be coming up in January, March, and April. If you have any questions on my recording, please feel free to call me or email me. And again, my contact information will be in the email provided along with this link. Thank you for your time. And again, I can't say thank you enough for all your help and your willingness to volunteer and help our students get better in this process. Thank you, and I'll see you at our practice.